All right, guys, welcome to the I Love CVille Show. It's great to be with you on a Tuesday. Humid and hot outside, guys. We have a fantastic program lined up for you. We're going to talk politics. We're going to dot the I's and cross the T's on Brian Pinkston's campaign. I was thoroughly impressed with his campaign, his platform, the things he was all about. I'm going to ask him about what's in store for him from a future standpoint. I think his future's bright within our community. And I'm saying that not just because he's sitting next to me, but because he is undoubtedly committed to making Charlottesville and Central Virginia in totality a better place for everyone of every socioeconomic level, of any background. We'll talk about that with BP in a matter of moments. We also have Joe Thomas in the house of the Joe Thomas Show. Charlotte Woods in the house for her second rodeo. She is the government and climate reporter for Charlottesville Tomorrow. This is going to be a free-flowing roundtable where we're going to hit every topic in the news cycle today. And you know we're going to do that when Joe Thomas is in the house. We're going to thank some of the sponsors that make the program possible. First, we'll give some love and some props to Interstate Pest and Service Company. I don't know if you know this, but the company started in 1969 with the first generation. One truck and one man, a willingness to work hard. He went to his first client, his first house, his first customer, serviced them successfully, and in 1969 would go to a payphone where he would call his second client and say, "May I come to see you now?" Today the business is four generations strong, almost 100 employees, a Commonwealth-wide footprint, and committed to making Charlottesville better, which is what we're all about at I Love CVille. We'll also give some props to our other client, Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine. Who's got your back? Dr. Wagner's got your back through physical therapy, chiropractic care, and sports medicine. He is changing people's lives. Stephen Lewis Warner, welcome to the program. Amy Hutchinson Williams, welcome to the program. Donna Grace Frederick, a lot of people watching. Give it a like, give it a share. Let's go to the studio cam. Let's welcome this motley crew of news junkies and folks committed to making Charlottesville better. We will start with this gentleman right here, Brian Pinkston, looking sharp in the pink tie, BP.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of those pink ties and pink shirts left over from the campaign, so I'll be deploying them over the next months and years, I suppose.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll start with this. James Watson, thank you for liking. I think you coming on the show speaks to your character and the kind of man who you are.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, you know we were a big fan of you on this program. Let's dot the I's, cross the T's on the campaign. Open-ended question. A narrow loss here. Talk to us about what transpired.
In terms of why I think I lost, or just how the events went down?
All the above.
Okay. Well, if I were to come in fourth to anyone, I was happy it was to Tina McGill. She's a friend of mine, and she's lived in the area all her life, and she's worked tirelessly for the homeless in this area, as well as working for Region 10, a group I used to assist with on their board. And so she's a fantastic person, lived her whole life, and I know will make a huge contribution to the city. In terms of how it transpired, just in general, this is one of those sorts of experiences running for city council, running for any sort of office, which is it really is something you should try to do once before you die, I suppose. It was a really wonderful experience all in all, but it also is a bit surreal. You've spent all of this individual time talking to specific people over the course of 6 months, raising money, knocking on doors, being at forums, and then it all comes down to a day. You're prepping the day before. You've got all your little buckets with your propaganda you're going to hand out to folks as they come across the walk up, and so you're just hoping, as you see people, sometimes you see people that you saw at a forum or knocking on their door, you just hope that by the time that day has transpired, all of those acts you've done over 6 months add up. And it was disappointing when that wasn't the case, but still it was a very rewarding experience all in all, and I would not have done anything different in terms of running.
Tina McGill came on this program last week. First thing she said was give you acknowledgement, and had the nicest things to say about you. Yeah. It was almost like bittersweet for her.
Sure. Yeah.
Getting the W. Yeah. She literally had admiration and respect and a kinship and a friendship for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't see that in a lot of local elections.
Yeah.
Last question, then we'll get the round table in the mix here. I have to ask the question, and this will be the end of the first sizzle reel, Harris, on Brian Pinkston. What is in store for Brian Pinkston's future in local politics?
I've been thinking about that a lot over the last 2 weeks. I've basically decided I really won't make any significant decisions until Labor Day. I'm going to stay committed to the local Democratic Party. I'm a co-precinct captain at Walker. I'm going to continue to help with that, and we'll participate through the November election. I'm hoping to get on a board or commission of some kind at some point. And I'm definitely going to stay plugged in that way. I'm very involved in my church, All Souls, Charlottesville. I see all of these as sort of all parts of one larger picture of trying to build a flourishing community. In terms of politics per se, we'll see 2 years from now. Maybe I'll be in a place where I will want to run again. It will depend. My kids are in college, what my wife says I can do, all of those sorts of things.
I hope you run again.
Thank you.
I hope you run again. We'll get the government reporter from Charlottesville Tomorrow to talk Brian Pinkston's campaign. Her name is Charlotte Woods. Charlotte, first, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw this to you. Brian Pinkston's campaign. Thoughts, feedback, your analysis on what transpired?
Yeah, I think as Brian was saying that a lot of it's this race in overall of City Council was really nice to see just how nice and friendly and connected every candidate was. I was at multiple candidate forums where ultimately a lot of you guys all had very similar ideas or identical ideas on policy proposals, and everyone would just compliment each other while being asked questions, and that was really nice to see. And then also, Brian, as a candidate, I would watch him walk up to people at events and ask them for their input or things that he could do for them if he gets elected. And that's really refreshing to see in a political candidate. Also, this guy is very on brand. Like, he showed up to the Walker precinct on Election Day. He rode in on his moped with his pink shirt on, and everyone just started kind of laughing and clapping when that happened. And a lot of candidates,
It's like a Vespa, right? It's a Vespa.
It's a Metropolitan.
Oh, Metropolitan. Okay.
Yeah, I was bouncing around different polling places, and I happened to be there when that moment happened, and I thought, okay, this is cool.
I think you really, and Brian, we're not just saying this because you're here, you really, because of your like easygoing and approachable and like good listener qualities, like I feel like you really like knocked down some doors that other candidates could not have. And you really come across as like a likable person. I think Cena does as well. Cena's extremely likable. Joe Thomas, host the Joe Thomas Show. This guy's fantastic. Listen to him in the morning all the time.
Not a likable person.
He is a likable person. He speaks his mind a little more freely. Brian Pinkston's campaign, Joe Thomas.
I think it was a testimony to what Charlottesville wants to get to. I think the whole city council race, like Charlotte said, is a testament to where we would like to get to in the pursuit of putting 2017 behind us. There are people who don't, because there's gains, there's branding, if you will, from it, and someday it'll fade. But politically speaking, I think you see this in a lot of the statements. I think Lloyd said it at his campaign headquarters. They all want to work together. And I think there's a subtle message in there that we're not really done with contentious city council meetings yet, because I think what the message I got in the subtext was that there's still a feeling that there's a lot of not getting along with one another on city council. And I don't know if it's another election cycle while that has to change, or if it changes from the bottom up and the citizens are the ones that demand it. But it was nice to see. I think we got about, 6,500 votes cast in the election. It's tough to tell in the city council race because they're voting for 3 slots. But then you look at the race for the House of Delegates nomination, I think it was maybe close to 7,000 votes cast. And it's still not a lot of votes when you look at a city that has, I think it's 23,000 registered voters in it, and that's something that's going to need to change because you need to get to a place where more than 10% of the population is choosing the representatives. And I think that's where I still go back to when Brian was on my radio show the last time. We got into the deep thought of something not on the table, not on the ballot, but something that I think everyone in Charlottesville needs to think about is representative districts.
We just got that question.
Oh, did you? All
From
right,
Neil.
see, there goes. Yeah.
This is a great topic. I want to throw it to all you guys here.
And please, I like to use the word representative district because I've noticed, and again, you're in the branding business, words like wards.
That's the question.
Ward doesn't poll well.
Because you're saying it has a negative connotation. It's almost like developer.
But exactly. Representative district says, well, yeah, of course I want a representative
It's more
district.
inclusive.
Ward, you think of old Chicago and the party boss and the cigar and only his buddies get anything, and it's not necessarily true. They're both the same thing legislatively, but the phrase plays better, I guess, if you call it representative districts.
Run the sizzle reel for Brian Pinkston all the way through that comment. That's the first one. I think it's a very good sizzle reel. Welcome Bellamy Brown to the show. He's watching right now.
When are you coming back on, Bellamy? I sent you a Facebook post.
Bellamy, Joe's got a great show. I think he would offer a lot of good exposure.
He's
for your
been
platform.
on. He's been on, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andre Xavier, owner of CVille Hop On Tours, watching. You're getting props from someone in Los Angeles right now. Is it J. Remy Preston?
Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy.
Giving you some props.
L.A. in the house.
Jonathan Crosby says you're awesome, Joe.
Oh, thank you, John.
And we have this question right here, right on cue. I'll start with you first. Neil Williamson, great guy.
Hey,
smart
Neil.
guy.
Yeah, I like Neil.
He asked this question: how would the panel feel about a ward-based election rather than an at-large election? Brian, Joe, Charlotte, Jerry. Do you think it would breed better representation and perhaps different candidates if it was a ward-based election? Brian Pinkston, to you, sir.
This came up a number of times. There may be bits of this that I'm missing, and if so, I'm happy to learn from others. My own view is I don't see the value in it. And part of it, I guess, is just my bias towards really, really enjoying walking around the whole city. And it is a big city in some ways, in other ways, it's not that big. You can. I got 3/4 of what I'd wanted to get walked. If I'd gotten 100%, maybe I would have won. But you can hit most of the primary voters. I do think, so I'm not sure I think I understand the theoretical idea of why that might make a difference. Part of it for me too is just my sense of the city is you've got multiple cities or multiple populations in the city that kind of live all over the place. You've got the sort of UVA-centric folks who live all over the place, people with that kind of mindset, I suppose. You've got more of the pure activist types that live all over the place. And you've got the sort of more quintessential, old school Charlottesville, most of which are up in Greenbrier, I suppose. But those sorts of mindsets are reflected geographically all over the place. So I'm not sure how the representation, in other words, it's different than I suppose in older days with other cities where a particular part of a city represented, say, a particular ethnic group or a particular immigrant population or something, going back a long time ago. And so for me, I just really enjoyed getting to know the whole city. I think it's compact enough that you can, if you really work hard, know the whole city and represent it well. But there may be something I'm missing.
Let's throw it to you, Charlotte. Ward-based election. This is the second sizzle reel. Start with my question to Brian, all the way through Joe's answer. Your thoughts on this?
Actually, I think Brian brought up some interesting points because if you have I previously was living in Richmond, Virginia, and you have your different districts that make up city council. And I'm trying to think of the perspective of a candidate, which I will never be, but just there's a difference between campaigning in your district versus the ability to go all over the city, interact with all of the residents, and understand what everyone wants or needs. Because ultimately, once somebody is elected, you're a public servant at that point. You have to be able to serve, and you have to be able to understand your constituents. So I think that not having ward-based elections would it could benefit candidates more broadly in terms of understanding.
Todd Proctor, welcome to the show. Orion Farouk, welcome to the show. Joe, I'm going to spitball with you, let you go first. I think I know where you're going to go, then I'm going to play some devil's advocate and throw it back to BP here. The show is yours, Joe Thomas.
Well, the thing about representative districts is axiomatically government that's closest to the citizen governs best. And unfortunately, right now we're in a wave where what I'm saying doesn't play well, because you're watching nationally. We watch the national zeal for popular election rather than congressionally districted electors. And there's a reason we're feeling less represented, and it isn't addressed by being less represented. And that's where I really feel it's not popular, it's not the tide, but if you break it down to each district has a voice, each district's going to have a vibe. It goes beyond just the elected official. It goes into the boards that they may appoint. So the Planning Commission's going to have a representative of District 1 on it. And they're going to say, hey, we need better job opportunities in this district. This company wants to do this. And Dr. Bellamy asked me this. So I made this presentation to City Council last time I came out from behind the rock. I hide behind and actually spoke to City Council about this because I felt like it was an important thing. And Wes asked me, he said, well, why would I do anything Kathy wants if I represent my own district? I said, because it's not a one man, one vote. You still need a majority of the votes on City Council to pass something. So if you're representing District 1 and she's representing District 2 and you need her vote, you need her to second your vote just to even get it onto the floor, you're more willing to work together with each other than to just sit there and say, here's what we want to do, and we'll agree to disagree. I mean, we're watching this a little bit with the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors.
One African American in the history of the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors has won a seat on the board. That's terrifying.
But it's not even just that. They walk out and everything seems to lately be, a unanimous vote, as if somewhere somebody in the hallway said, okay, this is the signal.
Right, they had the
and
conversation.
We all, the secret handshake.
That happens.
And so everything is unanimous decree right now. And I think that's a mistake, and that doesn't help somebody. For example, using Albemarle, the Rio district is dramatically different than the Whitehall district or the Scottsville district, and they have different wants. Maybe one wants to be a place where instead of just putting a housing complex where an old tire factory was, Scottsville, you want to part it out into a tech hub or an industry hub or an incubator of some kind that's going to generate maybe 4 or 5 smaller businesses, but where people can go and work and earn the money they need without having to drive into Charlottesville. Same in Crozet, they're talking about redeveloping the lumber yard down there. Is
Frank
that going to be
project.
5 or 6 small little? You're not going to have one big enterprise. You're not going to get the folks making textiles anymore, but you part it out a little bit into a few different enterprises that can do something towards employing 2 or 3 people at a time, and that starts to add up. But maybe another area wants to stay completely residential, and those voices are better heard when you're not dealing in the everyone's elected by everybody mindset.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, when I answered first, I was thinking more specifically about Charlottesville because it's much more condensed here. But when you think about the county and how just diverse the landscape is in the county and what each portion of each district there, magisterial district needs, you do have a fair point with that.
And if you look at what Ridge Schuyler did before they started the network to work, by the way, good job on the new office space. I read that in the paper. But if you look at the original Orange Dot project and then Orange Dot 2.0, you can see actual the gentrification in neighborhoods that are falling behind where other ones are prosperous. And if each one had their voice, they could be dealing with the needs in an area that's falling behind economically where other ones are being prosperous. It's very hard in a college town. I was talking about this with the mayor this morning on the show. A college town doesn't generate a lot of jobs for the revenue. So you have a UVA professor that might make 6 figures, but unlike somebody who might make 6 figures running a factory, they don't have to employ 10 or 15 people to do that, to generate that revenue. They might have 1 staffer.
And that's why we have such a huge wage gap in the city of Charlottesville. I'm going to throw this to Brian Pinkston. This is an interesting topic. I am very much in agreement with you. I think if we have a ward-based system, we may have perhaps more diversity in our council candidates. A perfect example is the 2019 Democratic primary and also the election in totality. I believe it was 8 candidates in totality, 5 for the Democratic primary. No African Americans, no one that's, Latino in the Democratic primary, and Bellamy Brown, the only African American in totality of 8. Perhaps with the ward-based system, I'll throw it to you and get out of the way, we may have some more diversity in who's running for council. Thoughts, Brian Pinkston?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a bit of a blank here. I mean, I'd really have to think about the actual how this would work out. I mean, I can certainly see the point, say, of one area in the city being predominantly African American, say, and I guess you would do it represented based on the number of people that live there. Is that kind of like?
I think it's based on neighborhoods.
Well, you base it on neighborhoods,
you'd
but you have to have apportionment.
You'd have to have some basis of
on population,
actual people that live there.
Yeah.
I can see how that might help drive up increased participation from people who might not participate. And, at the level of a city council election, this is a whole other thing we can talk about, is the cost of running for city council. You would likely, each person would have to raise less money to be able to do this if they were running on the basis of a district. So I can see some value in both of those pieces. The only thing that I would say is, what is the break point between, obviously a place like Albemarle County is just too big and spread out to do something like Charlottesville does. But Charlottesville does still seem to be compact enough, and
it's not really about the distance. It's about how each neighborhood kind of evolves around each other, and some are more industrial, some are more rural, and even Albemarle. I mean, as distance-wise, the population is still very concentrated in the urbanized ring around the city.
I think the only thing that I would say about that, and you and I may disagree on this point, is it goes back to the Electoral College and that whole notion of representing an area or an entity versus actual human beings. And I can see how there's value in representing a sort of area or a set of interests or even a sort of plot of land or whatever. But for me, I'm very much a lowercase d Democrat in terms of thinking that ultimately it needs to come down to number of bodies.
But they see that's the interesting part of it, though.
Yeah, and so again, this is probably something it'd be interesting to talk to you more about. But in terms of like running for city council, again, and Heather felt the same way. One of the things that I will always treasure is my time
hitting all the streets.
Yeah, going into places like, over in Fifeville or over in,
Ridge Street.
Yeah, what is the street? Orangedale.
Yeah, Prospect.
Yeah, Prospect.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. But, being able to sort of inhabit that kind of space one week and then be up in Greenbrier another week, and keeping both of those in your brain as you're thinking about, okay, what's best for the city? What's best for the city? What's best for the city? How do I balance these real concerns of people on Prospect Avenue with folks in Greenbrier, who complain about deer? I'm not trying to criticize them, but trying to put all those things together and thinking about what's the common good, because both groups have legitimate concerns. And for a place like Charlottesville, with the history of Charlottesville, with the needs of Charlottesville, my own view is that if you could figure out the funding piece, and if you could figure out the representation of, like you mentioned, African Americans, if those weren't issues, I still think having at-large would be better.
And the sizzle reel on that. More questions coming in, topics coming in. I think one of the things that we've highlighted on this show, Gerard Smith lost to B. Lepisto Kirtley on Albemarle County Board of Supervisors. We've had one African American on Albemarle County's Board of Supervisors in the history of the Board of Supervisors. That, for me, is terrifying and not an indication of the demographics that I know of Albemarle County. Yes, Albemarle County is very affluent, and yes, Albemarle County has a large white population. Okay, but it is more diverse than those demographics would indicate based on the people who've won a spot on the Board of Supervisors. This topic has just come in, and I want to ask you the cost about running an election. This topic has come in, and I'll throw it to Charlotte to start, and let's banter on this, about a strong mayor elected at large. And it's come to more fruition of late, and I think perhaps why it's come to more fruition of late is, and I'll straight up say this, Mayor Walker is somewhat polarizing. I think that's safe to say. Somewhat polarizing in the city of Charlottesville. That is safe. And as a result of that polarization, a lot of folks have asked, perhaps we need a strong mayor elected at large. I'm going to throw that question of electing a strong mayor to Charlotte of Charlottesville Tomorrow. Your thoughts? They have this in Richmond, your old stomping grounds.
Yes. So, yeah, in Richmond, I was there on election night at Juan Gonzalez when LeVar Stoney was elected. I just had a feeling he was, once John Belials dropped out and endorsed him, I had a feeling he would either come in close second or he would win, and I was there. And at the same time, City Council my former councilman, Parker Agalasto was, reelected at the same time. So yeah, City Council elections run separately from mayor elections in Richmond. But it is worth noting that here in Charlottesville, our city manager has different powers and controls than the I guess less strong mayor is what we're calling it here. So it's interesting coming from a governing body like that to this. And sometimes LeVar Stoney's been polarizing with his own council. Sometimes there's been some back and forth during meetings, but ultimately, I haven't actually followed city politics there in a while because I've been living here. I do try to keep an eye on things, though. But yeah, there's definitely interesting points on how each type of governing body can function. I think it's also worth noting when you were mentioning race earlier, the fact that, okay, yes, Albemarle County, we have only one African-American board of supervisor in its history.
Yeah.
And then someone who stepped up to the par and came really close this time. And then also here in Charlottesville City Council, I think it's worth examining the Democratic Party here versus the independents, because Mayor Nakia Walker, she ran as an independent. Now we've got Bellamy Brown running as an independent. Is that maybe a response to maybe...
Dr. West Bellamy, though.
He did
Okay,
run as...
that would counter that.
Okay, yes. But it is definitely interesting to analyze and sit back and kind of think about as things go forward and as more and more elections come. But as for an opinion on which type of mayor would work best, I don't think that I have one.
What do you think, Joe Thomas?
You have to take the titles out of it, in my view, anyway.
Okay.
You have legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch in all our forms of government. Mm-hmm. In Charlottesville, the executive branch is the city manager. It's not the mayor, even though it's a title. The title mayor goes to somebody who's in the legislative branch acting as a member of the legislative branch. So it's easy to confuse the two. If you have an elected mayor, strong mayor, whatever you want to call him, then they need to be in charge of the executive branch. That is how mayors work, is you elect them to run the operations, the police department, the fire department, the sanitation department. All of that needs to be under the auspices of the executive branch. I've seen some cities that do this weird hybrid where you have an elected mayor and a city manager, and the city manager still gets all the responsibility that ours does, but then why did we elect a mayor?
To raise tax dollars because you're paying them both more money.
Right. And so I'm of the mind that I would be absolutely fine with a strong mayor if we eliminated the city manager. And again, this is all stuff that requires massive changes in the charter of Charlottesville. Yeah. This is all great theater, and it's good for talk radio and talk TV show, but it requires a lot of agreement in Richmond too. It requires Professor Hudson to agree with it. It requires Cree Deeds to agree to it, and then for them to get enough support amongst their other delegates and senators to approve it on top of it. So the at-large city mayor is something that you would have to change that way. You can change the representative district system without going through all that. We did that with the Charlottesville School Board when that went to an elected body. So you can move forward on some of these issues. I think more representation generates more voter turnout, generates better party participation. This is, for Mike and Ivy, you guys would actually have better party participation, because in districts then it's easier to come up with somebody saying, hey, I want to be involved, because you don't feel so far away from it. And that's where I feel like all as a society, we're feeling too far away from the people who are representing us, the people who are running the city.
That will have our back.
Well,
Yeah.
they're
I think there's a lot of
bureaucrats,
truth to that.
and I've brought this up to some controversy. Charlottesville had a quarter of its population 100 years ago, and I think the city council was 2 people smaller. So the city's population has grown quite a bit, and its representation hasn't. The same is true in Richmond. We had a third of the population in 1919 and exactly the same size General Assembly. Yes, I know that means I'm saying we should have more members of the General Assembly, but there are more of us. That's why Democrat or Republican, independent, party membership, we all are itchy with this feeling that we're not being listened to. Now, I think beyond that, I get a lot of my conservative friends saying, well, you're talking about bigger government. Not necessarily, because if you have more elected representatives, they could sit on a board overseeing a Department of Environmental Protection rather than a bureaucrat that nobody's ever heard of and has served 3 straight governors, Democrat and Republican alike. They just keep working on the same thing. And that's where I feel like, story out of Harrisonburg, I don't know if you get any listeners there, the director of economic development in prison for accused of embezzling $17 million under the guise of affordable housing and green energy. You used that, we're doing green energy, we're doing affordable housing, so scrutiny wasn't strong. And all of a sudden she was doing patronage deals, kickbacks, and straight up embezzlement is what the charges are, and she's in jail right now awaiting arraignment on it. That's what happens when you wind up with people who have no connection to the voters, because they're the bureaucrats that, as long as I keep my head down, nobody's going to say anything to me.
That's a segue into an embezzling situation we have in the city of Charlottesville. We will table that for a second, because I don't want to necessarily put you so much on the hot spot right now. Although we can talk about it if you'd like.
He's turning pinker.
Yeah, I have no information or context. I don't want to. Yeah,
I understand completely.
Let's
We will
get all
talk
set
about
up.
that. I want to throw this to you. The cost, you've talked about this. You touched on this. The cost of running a campaign in the city of Charlottesville. There was quite a wide disparity between what Lloyd Snook did from a fundraising standpoint down to, say, like what a Bob Fenwick did from a fundraising standpoint. Fenwick perhaps did not put the fundraising effort in as, say, a Lloyd Snook. I think that's probably safe to say. That topic to you.
Yeah, so this is one.
And welcome David Toscano to the show, and welcome Steve Harvey to the show.
All right, so
Steve
we've got
Harvey's
bipartisan.
Steve Harvey is running
Presenting.
for Board of Supervisors in Albemarle County. Show is yours.
Yeah, so this is something I want to be delicate in speaking to.
Okay.
The first time I went to training on how to run for office, it's the Road Forward PAC training put on by Meredith Richards, a lovely, lovely woman, former city councilor.
Huge into trains.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
And one of the first things she told me about running for office is that I would have to, so much of it would have to do about raising money. And I was like, oh yeah, whatever, But when I finally chose to run for office, my campaign manager, the amazing Isaac Weitz, he should be a personal trainer, because he was always like, if you call people for money, call people for money. Well, it's a lot of what you do in these races is try to raise money. Now, all this is online. I raised about $21,000, which is pretty impressive for a no-name person like me. About a fifth of that, though, went to pay for Mr. Weitz because I work full-time, and I could not have done it without him. So if you back out from that, we spent about $11,000 on 2 really, I think, amazing mailers that went out to 5,000 people. And then
Signage.
The signage. So by the time you start going through the accounting of what it takes to run a modern campaign, a lot of what you do is ask people for money. Now there's this whole, so with Lloyd benefited from a whole life well lived, right? I mean, I don't. There's no. He's lived his whole life here. He's served this community well, and people.
He's been a planning commissioner.
Yeah,
he's been head of the Democratic Party.
That's the way people chose to acknowledge that, which is I admire and respect. Bob, I'm not really sure how engaged he was actually with running for city council.
Right.
That's a question for him. But if you're not raising money, then that's kind of a marker for how engaged you are. There was a lot of money, just be honest, sort of flowing into this whole ecosystem from a large donor in town that everyone knows of. That was flowing into the delegate campaign.
Sally Hudson's campaign.
Yeah, and how that washed over into my campaign, I don't think there was any specific or explicit things that happened. But my point is that if you look at the whole ecosystem of this campaign, Michael and Sally were running, and I won't say as a pair, that's not accurate, but they certainly were together in terms of how people conceived of them. There was a lot of, Indivisible Charlottesville was promoting joint canvases and so forth. So those sorts of things flowing, and then the whole thing about that particular source of money is it gets labeled as non-corporate, because that's, people like Michael are really against corporate money. Well, I would much rather take money, and this is where I'm getting on my soapbox, I would much rather take money from CAR, the Charlottesville real estate people. The largest gift I took was from them for $2,500. Okay, I'm happy I took that money. I needed it to do what I did. But for me, I would much rather take a gift like that. And most of the gifts that I took were from individuals. But I'd much rather take a gift like that that's up front than some of this really large dollar donations that are flowing into these campaigns from single individuals that themselves have
Tremendous influence over you in perpetuity.
Well, I don't care so much about that, because I think the people that, I don't think that any of the people in this race are buyable in any way or will be influenced in any way.
Okay.
Don't hear me saying that.
Okay.
My point is that there's a little bit of hypocrisy going on when you've got people talking about how they're so against corporate money, and yet you've got gifts coming in from people that make their money through hedge funds, through a whole range of perfectly acceptable, things for a Republican to do, high finance, that sort of thing, but that are funding really, progressive sorts of campaigns. And so I'm only pointing that out because it's frustrating to me when I really busted my butt to go ask people time and time again, will you give me $100 or you give me $200? And then, your competition gets a check for an astounding amount of money, and then another part of your competition is working closely with a delegate who got an astounding amount of money. It's hard to compete. I really am the sort of quintessential Joe citizen who decided on January 1 that I was going to run for city council and came within a whisker of doing so. And I will say that it's hard to do that. I mean, if you don't have the networks, if you don't have the connection to the activists, and if you don't have the sort of favor with certain donors, it's a challenge to raise the money. Does that sound like sour grapes or whatever?
No, it doesn't sound like sour grapes.
Hope it doesn't.
No,
it's just, I'm an engineer, and just trying to think about how these things play out. It does take money to run a modern campaign. I think we should get over the fact that it takes money to run a modern campaign. Maybe we need to agree in the city that we're only going to take total amount.
You're saying cap it.
Cap it. Maybe a gentlewoman's agreement where we all say in the future, I won't take a gift more than $2,000 from anybody. Because there's a lot of, I think, hypocrisy, and I think there's also a lot of, I don't know, I just think we need to be, particularly as good Democrats, who, part of our whole brand, I'm a Democrat, proud of it, but I was a Republican for a large part of my life.
You're a libertarian.
No, I'm not.
No?
We can talk about that in another show.
Okay.
But, as good Democrats, a lot of what we pride ourselves on is transparency, and we don't take money from the man or whatever. But if we're not being, to me, fully upfront with how we're funded and setting some sort of internal controls about, okay, I'm only going to take a gift of this amount, I think we run the risk of being hypocritical. And I also think it doesn't undermine democracy in some grand way. I'm not saying that, but what it does is it discourages a person like me, again, just a normal dude who has a normal job, from like wanting to jump in. If you feel like right off the bat you've got these people you're competing with.
Huge mountain to climb.
And the same for the activist networks. If you don't have access to the Indivisible mailing list, for instance, I love those people. I love them. They're great, and I've supported them. But maybe this will change in a few years. I don't know, but right now, those sorts of things are important factors to just understand for a new person wanting to break in. Hey, this is part of what you're up against.
This is another sizzle reel. Start with my question to Brian, and we're going to keep it going through his answer. So I'm going to give some background on this, and then I'm going to throw it to Charlotte. Sonia Smith gave roughly $150,000 to Sally Hudson's campaign.
I think it was only 100,000.
No, it was up 150,000.
Was it?
Yeah. I'm looking at the press release too. 150,000.
Okay,
and Sally, who's a tenant in our building here,
and a fine person.
Oh, she's fantastic.
Yeah, lovely person.
Fantastic. We're just talking facts here.
Yeah.
Sally ran a strategic partnership in some ways with Michael Payne.
It certainly seems that way.
It certainly seemed that way to me. Sonia Smith, and I'm going to throw, you can speak really about this as well, Joe Thomas. Sonia Smith gave roughly $50K to Robert Tracy's opponent. And Robert Tracy has a huge uphill battle because of that $50,000 cash infusion to Jim Hinckley's campaign. And he's the Democrat for the office of Commonwealth's attorney. Mike Signer, when he ran for election, had over $50,000 of campaign contributions, which at the time was the largest amount ever fundraised in a city council election. There's a huge disparity between the candidates and what they're fundraising and how it impacts their election and their chance to win a spot on council. You can go anywhere you want on this topic, Charlotte Woods.
I think whether your money is coming from a corporation or a PAC or private citizens, I think the idea of a cap is something that everyone could probably get behind, and that would just level the playing field a little bit. But also, because at the end of the day, you do need money to run a campaign, but sometimes that money can be an uphill battle or be discouraging if, like as Pinkston said, you're not somebody who's already had that groundwork and those connections going. So I think that a cap would be something at the city, state, and federal level I think people could get behind. Because at the end, and because your money is going to come from the people who support you, and those people might be from a corporation or a PAC or private citizens who maybe they're loaded and they want to give you a lot of money, but you can say, hey, I can only take this much. Just to be fair.
There's salary caps in sports to breed parity. Should there be salary caps in political elections to breed similar parity?
Well, you're talking about wage and price controls is what you're really talking about, and they never work. Part of what you do when you cap how much somebody can take in an election, whether it be in a grand scale or from an individual, is you empower the PACs. And Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. The more you empower the PACs, the more you start to get these campaign ads that, oh, we're not advocating one person, but let me bash the other guy for you. And I think what you wind up, Brian said something that I had my eyes open decades ago about, because you think as an abstract that costs of campaigns are all about TV ads and radio ads, and they're not inexpensive, but the number one driver of all political cost are the mailers. So I'm going to forego my commentary because I have to ask, do you feel, Brian, that the mailers had any ROI? Because
any value? Good question.
Every mailer that came into my house,
you threw it away?
For the most part, okay, it's another mailer. I mean, they're giant. They're odd
flood
sizes.
your mailbox.
And I think after a while they become cardboard white noise.
Yeah.
Did you track anything? Is there a way to know?
I think they absolutely did for me. So I had two strategies, basically, was to knock on doors like a maniac, and I only got 3/4 of the way through that, mostly because of the forums, which are one of the worst parts of campaigning, by the way. So I had two strategies: knock on doors and raise enough money to do 2 strong mailers. And you can do really small mailers that are just sort of getting your name out there, and those. Or you can do really nice, beautiful mailers. And we invested in those with the company Mad Dog. They did a fantastic job. And they were able to, I hate these words, sorry, but brand me as a certain, really spoke to who I hope to be and think I am and wanted to be for the city. And they just did a masterful job. And it put me in a place with people that I felt like I really needed to be. If I had been like Lloyd, who lived here his whole life, he didn't have to do that. He had one little single mailer. And so, yeah, I can't quantify it, but I think if I hadn't done it, I would have lost by a much larger margin.
Well,
So I don't, in terms of the ROI, in terms of, spent $10,000, was it worth
10 grand.
Yeah, but that's what it takes. I mean, that's the cost if you want to do. That's not like going over to Kinko's or someplace.
Totally get no. I saw
This
your
is
mail.
like
Yeah,
this is doing.
that's
my
roughly
language-
50% of what you fundraise because you said 21K, right?
That's
So
right.
just under 50%.
That's right.
And then 4 and change went to Isaac.
Yeah. So you think about. Sorry, Isaac, to bring all this up, but it's public record.
Yeah. That was his campaign manager.
I mean, you think about what you have to do as a no-name person like myself. It's you've got to be in people's faces at their front doors, and that's basically just shoe leather. That's every night and weekend, and then you've got to try to cover the bases otherwise with mailers or some other things, And I was really proud of the mail that we wrote. Now, this again plays into the fact, and one other contingency of this whole campaign is the fact that we were running there was a very obviously normally David Toscano has always run, and so there's not really been another name in the ring, but this time the delegate race was very, I won't say controversial, but it was very noisy and there was a lot of stuff going on around it.
I have a question on that.
And so that was another piece of this whole campaign for the city councilors who were sort of second-tier candidates in this whole thing. We were competing for eyeballs with people in the delegate race. That's not a criticism. It's just a fact. So, for instance, I must have gotten 5 or 6 pieces from Sally that were all gorgeous pieces of mail. But after a while, it does tend to flood out. If you're trying to just get in 1 or 2 nice pieces, you have to wonder what effect it has.
A couple of topics coming in. A lot of stuff coming in right now. Carol, you're getting props. Carol Schwab Barnett, Joe Thomas
Hey,
is the
Carol.
best thing to happen to Charlottesville in quite some time. Doug Brooks says Joe is a huge credit to the area. I got somebody asking a question about Indivisible Charlottesville that asked not to be named for Brian Pinkston, which I will throw to you. I have a question, and this came up the last time we did a roundtable with Elliot Harding. Elliot Harding's an attorney in the area.
I know Elliot.
Like big in the Democratic Party. He wants
Republican Party.
Sorry, Republican Party. You're right, Republican Party. Now leading toward Libertarian. He's told me multiple times, and he's considering a run for office as well. We'll welcome Elliot when he gets back from his honeymoon on the show again. This is something he wanted me to ask you. You had a sample ballot being passed out at some of the precincts that had you and Lloyd and Kathy Galvin on the sample ballot. And from a strategy standpoint, he wondered, because of the large disparity in the Hudson-Galvin race, if that could have hurt. Thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, this is kind of a bearing your soul to Jerry here. The entire campaign, the only thing that I look back on with significant regret is that sample ballot. Now, I hated our yard signs. There's certain things that you do. I mean,
See, I liked your yard
like
I
signs.
think
Your
it
sign
stood
too,
out
good.
because bold
Yeah.
colors.
Well,
It was
they
good.
could have been better, but you think about it. You're a newbie at all this. You start on January 1. You're calling people. You're raising money. You're trying to figure out the networks. You're setting up Gmail. You're setting up a website. You're doing all of this stuff. You're meeting. You're working full time in a job. You're doing all of this stuff, and you can't make certain decisions until you have the money for them, for instance. So it's always this kind of leapfrogging thing. And given all that we had going on, we were just doing the best we could. Now, with respect to the sample ballot, I, all the way through the campaign, did not want to do anything like that.
Form a strategic partnership?
I didn't want to form a strategic partnership because I see myself as I don't consider myself establishment or really anything. I am a 47-year-old white male, and I certainly have some conservative views about how money should be spent, but I don't know that you could find a person who, cares more about progressive values than I do. But I did not want to wade into anything with the Hudson-Galvin deal. Now, my affinity, and I'll be perfectly honest, was for Kathy because of the fact that, regardless of how she may come across sometimes or her votes on certain whatever, I respect people who served. I respect people that have have sat in a seat and have done the work for decades. And I respect, that doesn't mean I disrespect other people, but
Sure.
that is something that is really
You value
important.
experience.
And lived experience. And so basically what happened was towards the end of the campaign, we had some, volunteers on my team, on her team, Kathy's team, who there were some natural synergies in terms of doing literature drop and things like that. And we were like, yeah, this is fine because no volunteer is going to feel like, oh, I've got to vote for this person or that. What happened with the sample ballot was, without going into details, essentially, it was at the last minute sort of decision. I was really, really weary, and the suggestion was made that this might be a way to honestly give some assistance to her campaign in terms of the fact that our campaign, it was perceived, was doing very well, and this might be a way to link those two in people's mind. I did that because I care for her. I respect her as someone who served the city honorably for so many years. I did not do it for any other reason, like to strategically or tactically do whatever. It probably was a mistake in terms of votes. I don't know. You'll never know. But I don't regret the reasons that I did it. I thought that they were honorable reasons. The decision was made at a point when I was very tired and wasn't thinking well and wasn't asking enough wise counsel. But I regret it because it goes against the whole what I'm about, which is the common good. I think there's way too much division. When I showed up and I saw these damn things, I was like, this looks like a slate. This is what this is. I hate slates, particularly the Democratic Party right now. I would like us to all be, as unified as possible. To be honest with you, with respect to Indivisible, they had been saying on their email blasts for months that they were going to have a sample ballot at the polls for Kathy and Michael. I was like, well, if they're doing it, I guess all bets are off. They chose not to do that at the last minute. I'm not sure why. But that's sort of what went into that. And it is, meaning no disrespect to anyone, especially Kathy Galvin, who I respect and admire. That's something I wish I had not done.
I appreciate that answer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, from the heart. From the heart. And that sizzle reel on that right there. We get another question coming in about what you just said. I'm going to throw it to these guys. This is about Indivisible. This is the question. They asked that I not use their name. Charlotte and Joe on this. Indivisible Charlottesville is listed as a nonprofit, and they endorse two candidates, Sally Hudson and Michael Payne, which is a violation of nonprofit status. They would have to be a political action committee to spend money for candidates, but endorsing candidates is against nonprofit regulation. Indivisible is a nonprofit, yet they still endorse two candidates. I think this impacted the election and Brian Pinkston's chance of getting a seat on council. Can you raise this topic to your panel? It's a good topic right there. Do you want to handle this one? Do you want to go?
I'll start lightly because I'm not going to have much to say on it. I work for a nonprofit, so I'm going to stay impartial on this and jump to you for now. I also want to look into it further.
Well, and I agree with Charlotte on this because there are nonprofits that have political action committees adjunct to them. It's interesting, whenever you say Americans for Prosperity, people sneer, but when you say Indivisible Charlottesville, they don't. Maybe it's just the audience. But you have to have, I forget if it's a 501c5 or I forget what level then you can get into political activities. But if they are just a 501c3, they've broken some very big laws. And a part of the laws that were used in 2009 to hold up the activities of some of the Tea Party organizations. Now, the Jefferson area Tea Party set themselves up directly as a 501c3, said we're not getting involved in campaigns. We'll have everyone here. Tom Perriello used to come to their meetings, talk to them. They were never going to endorse a candidate. They said, we just want straight 501c3. A lot of Tea Party organizations wanted the 501c4 or whatever it was, the tax code that made them able to hold campaign events, to endorse candidates, and that's what hung them up in that famous case of the IRS holding up these approvals. But they do hold higher scrutiny. Those are higher scrutiny because now you're involving yourself. You're taking money in. There's tax advantages to giving to them anyway, and then they're also getting involved in the system.
So if I could say, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. I did it to you, so you owed me
No,
one.
it's fine. This specific question, you can be assured that smart people that I know checked, and I don't think there's an issue with Indivisible Charlottesville. They're smart people. They did their homework. The Indivisible network throughout the country, I think, has these sorts of things. I don't know all the details, and but I just want to say, go on record that, first of all, I admire the steering committee of Charlottesville Indivisible. They're fantastic people. I know that their hearts are always in the right place. I'm 98.3% sure that they're fine on this particular topic because we had some people that just sort of double checked.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's the thing is that there are scrutinies within primary elections, especially because you're talking about within brand, if you will, to this, where they're trying to find who their activists are going to follow. But going around this one more time, I think, again, this remakes my case for not just representative districts. Paul Long, in an eloquent speech to City Council, I love Paul dearly, but he got up and he was very clear. This cuts into how much you have to spend to run for a City Council seat. If you're dealing with just a district in your neighborhood, you can do the door knocking, maybe do door hangers instead of mailers. I think Mike Hallahan for Scottsville is doing door hangers instead of mailers. So when he goes to visit your house, if you're not there, he leaves you a door hanger. Sort of the same thing, but I think at a lower cost, especially when you don't have to get into franking.
Yeah.
Which is where I think a lot of the cost comes.
You're talking
into
postage.
Postage, yeah. But the smaller the districts that you have to reach out to, the lower the cost of entry. Yeah. And the less that burden on somebody like Brian, who might say, hey, I'd like to get my voice heard on City Council. My neighbors think that their voice needs to be heard.
You got a number of media outlets watching this right now, so I would not be surprised if there's, including fantastic reporter right here, if there's some follow-up into this topic. Yeah, this gentleman has, okay.
Yeah, I think the last thing that...
Because he has to go. He's given us his most precious commodity, his time, during the workday.
Yeah, I think, again... I'm speaking as a couple hats. First of all, I am a member of the Charlottesville Democratic Party and proud of it. I care about the party locally and nationally. A lot of what we're seeing right now in the city, and probably Elliot and Charlotte were able to speak to it last time they were here, are things that are being ramified up, and you'll see this in the debates that happened this week in the party at large. And I think that the sort of energy and passion that the activist community is bringing to these issues like justice and racial relations are overdue, important voices to hear. And I certainly respect them. My only point is that I do think that groups like Indivisible Charlottesville, in their hope and desire to elevate a certain vision of a progressive future, that, if you want to call it unintended consequences or things that maybe you weren't thinking about, I think we need to think about democracy both in the really big sense and also in the really small sense. What does democracy look like? I think part of what democracy is, and again, I'm not trying to cry the blues, but I do think that part of what democracy looks like is a person that, has some networks, but not a whole lot. A person like Sina, perhaps, or like me, is kind of able to come in, get to know people, talk, and build the case for themselves by themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think
that's what Bellamy's doing.
Yeah, I actually asked some folks on Indivisible Charlottesville early back in the year to please stay out of this race, because let's at least have one space in this whole country and world where everything doesn't have to be so hyper whatever, and where people can just go present their case, knocking on doors, talking about what's important to them without a bunch of rocket fuel through, honestly, social media. And, they chose to do something different, and that's fine. But I just want to make what I think is hopefully the larger point and a good point, which is If we want to have representative democracy of just normal folks trying to step up, we need to think about, the importance of networks. A person who's African American doesn't have access to the networks, for instance. How do we proactively help that? In our zeal to pursue a certain agenda about, progressive change, while we're pursuing those goals, I think that the means by which we pursue our goals are as important as the goals themselves. If we're not thoughtful about how we treat each other on social media, if we're not thoughtful about where our money
The golden rule.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just kind of digressing.
No, you're not. And it's 1:34. We want to let you go? Hold on one second. Respect. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Seriously.
Hope to see you again.
Seriously.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, good
Brian.
to see you all. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
And I'm sorry for you ruining your election by endorsing you at the end, but
you live and you learn.
Thank you, Brian.
Good job.
We appreciate you. Let's get Charlotte and Joe in the mix here to close the show. Charlotte, we will give you opportunity to go any direction you want on this topic. A lot we covered here. I think we had some news potential in the cycle here with the Daily Progress, with the CVille and NBC 29 watching right now. Charlotte, anywhere you want to go, any topic whatsoever.
I thought Daily Progress had nothing to do with CVille. Tomorrow anymore.
CVille Tomorrow. No, I'm talking. No, I wasn't talking about that partnership. I'm talking about the people
But
that
they
are
shouldn't
watching.
be watching
The
then.
people that are watching right now. We have
Shame on
CVille
you.
Weekly, CVille Weekly, Daily Progress, and NBC 29, and she's a reporter with Charlottesville Tomorrow. Anywhere you want to go. How about Brian Pinkston?
What about?
The campaign, his honesty right here. Him talking about. What really took me from this is he straight up said on air in front of the camera, when we have a lot of folks watching right now, I made a mistake with my strategy and the sample ballot with Kathy and with Lloyd Snook. And I appreciated his straightforwardness and his authenticity, if you may.
Yeah, sometimes voters will clump people together in a slate. I noticed a lot of road signs leading up to the election where you'd have different clusters of certain candidates always in pairs or triplets or quadruplets. And so some of the voters were doing that themselves. But again, to see it on a sample ballot feels like a bit of a in-your-face sort of situation. And to see a political candidate express such candor, it is nice to see. And I think going forward, I'm just excited to keep tracking all these other elections. And there's a lot of state stuff, too. And the Commonwealth's Attorney, I know, Tracy, this is my new-ish to town is showing for that, officially announced today. And Jim Hingley's had some people out at polls on the primary day just to get a head start. And I spoke with someone from his team when I went to an Albemarle poll. But yeah, and then as for Charlottesville Tomorrow, we've got a lot of long form content dropping in the next couple of days and weeks. We're really pivoting towards a lot of in-depth, larger coverage. And when you want some fast stuff, you can still go, the Daily Progress. Like if you think about Elliot and Nolan going to City Council, they are veterans there. You can always count on Nolan to get you a piece right away that night with the breaking. And then Elliot can explore things a little bit deeper. And then you've got both things serving the community.
I love it. I love that answer. I'll relay a comment. Joe, we'll give you the final word on the program here. This is from Doug. There are way too many labels in CVille. We have too many Democrats, too many Republicans, too many progressives, and so on and so on. We need independents. We need common folks running our city. That's from Doug. Joe Thomas, anywhere you want to go, sir.
Well, first, I made a promise the last time I was on this program.
You did.
And I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to fly in the face of, David Toscano doesn't need to keep his brand out there. I don't even know if he's still watching, but he's got something up there.
Yeah.
I'm going to put a brand up there. If it goes up there, I don't know, that is completely unheard of because it's defunct. But it was one of the coolest logos for a radio station I ever was honored to be part of. And if you can get this is a gift for Jerry.
Yes.
Because
I used to work there.
This was when I first met Jerry Miller. He was Sports Radio 1400, WKAV. The logo actually looks better in like a bumper sticker form because it's like steel and rivets and all
Still
that
looks
stuff. But that's for you because honestly, if I wore it, it would not make any sense. So
Thank you.
There you go. I promised you
Those
I'd
were
give
some
you
good
some
times.
Yes, sir.
Joe was my boss at the time.
And can you imagine Jerry Miller talking? Do you do any sports talk on here?
I don't do any sports talk.
Politics.
I do local. I mean,
You've
could
had
do
musicians
sports.
on. I've enjoyed the musicians and everything else.
I've thought about it.
Yeah, but that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. I keep my promises.
Thank you.
And at 3:00 this morning, when I'm like, oh, I forgot, I gotta get Jerry this shirt. I'm running back into the house. We represent ourselves best when we're close to who we need to represent ourselves. And this past week, both the city and the county chose to disassociate themselves from a guy who wrote perhaps one of the most eloquent treatises against slavery ever under the auspices of that he's a racist. And if you go to the Library of Congress, this isn't like you have to go to Alex Jones's website or anything to find this. This isn't conspiracy theory. Go to the Library of Congress and look up the original draft of the Declaration of Independence. We're going into July 4th. I'm honored. You mentioned the award I got from the Virginia Association of Broadcasters. Absolutely a great honor. But in that same week, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the annual Liberty Bell ringing, which there's one replica Liberty Bell in every state capital except Virginia. Ours is in Charlottesville. It's at the Firehouse on Ridge Street. Come on down, 1 o'clock on Independence Day. I was honored to be invited to be the keynote speaker. But if you look up the the abuses and usurpations segment, and it's actually depicted in the wonderful musical 1776, he has waged cruel war against human nature itself. And it goes on, it's the longest one that Jefferson writes. And it is an absolute indictment of the supposed, and this is quoting Jefferson, the supposed Christian king of Great Britain who dragged people from one country and forced them upon another. And it actually makes fairly clear that the legislative body that Jefferson was in had tried before to get out of slavery. I find it troubling that in small numbers, representing large numbers, they could take a person out that not only is from Virginia. It's one thing the Virginia Democratic Party doesn't want to have a Jefferson Jackson dinner, that's fine. But when the home of Jefferson votes to disassociate itself from Jefferson, but oddly not the tax revenue that comes from Monticello. Funny how that happened. I mean, when you do that, I might give you some credit.
That'll never happen. You know that.
Under the auspices of him being a racist, just because they say he's a racist, we need to get closer to our representatives. This is why I'm on this campaign to representative districts in the city, more representatives in Richmond, fewer bureaucrats, more representatives in Washington, fewer bureaucrats, better representation. You want a popular vote? I say you go the other direction, get better representation in Washington, and then let your congressional districts apportion your members of the electoral college individually. And now you're really close to getting an actual view of how each state views their elections. And remember that the best government governs locally.
Joe Thomas, good final word right there. I'm going to close with this note, and it's about the show, and I'm going to make mine the Cliff Notes version. You see what we're trying to do with the show. We try to welcome folks from many different backgrounds. We had Brian Pinkston, who's a proud Democrat. He said that on the show. We had Joe Thomas, who is certainly very conservative in nature. We had Charlotte, who plays it neutral and down the middle, and is kind of offering perspective from a background standpoint.
May I insert, though, as a journalist, rock on with that. Please keep doing that.
She crushes it.
No, but I'm saying journalists right now are getting
neutral.
a rap for having agendas.
Right.
And I've appreciated every time you've tried to drag her into an agendized point, she's been
And she did it the first time, too. And I think that's the nature of social media and building a brand on social media and and journalists heading down that road of being a personal brand as opposed to the brand that's tied to the editorial company that they work for. So all we're trying to do with this program is to throw perspective out there and allow you guys to gauge and decide which direction you want to go. It's about education. We close the show the same way, and how we close the show is we ask you to embody the golden rule. We don't make it about religion. We do make it about treating others with the same respect you want to be treated yourself. And if we do that in Charlottesville and Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world, it will be a better place for all of us. And I say that now at a time when Charlottesville needs it more than ever. I'm Jerry Miller for Brian Pinkston, Joe Thomas, Charlotte Woods. It's the I Love CVille Show. The show will be archived in totality on ilovecville.com. Today's show was fantastic. Enjoy your afternoon. You guys did so well.
Thank you.
So good. Thank you.
Ah, thanks.
Thank you. Joe.
Now, enjoy the shirt too.
We'll put it up.
So important.
And we'll put it up. We will